This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
There are really two kind of iconic amp brands in my mind. There's Fender, the clean, there's Marshall, the drive. And I think probably for me, the thing that my childhood I can really remember seeing more than anything is a Marshall logo. To me, Marshall was the only amp basically when I was a kid that I can remember knowing about until I got into Dream Theater and stuff, and then Mesa Boogie, and then as you get older you hear about all these other things. I think as well because I was into Thin Lizzy, Gary Moore, Joe Satriani, these kind of players, and I mean even before that like Oasis, Marshall was the thing. Now we all know Marshall now, his most famous user is Liam Payne from One Direction, who recently got facial reconstruction to look more like a 4x12, didn't he? Anyway, right, so yesterday the news came out that Marshall had been bought by a Swedish brand called Sound, which I hadn't heard of. They put out a press release, basically Sound Industries, more in the consumer electronics kind of realm, smaller speaker type things. Global consumer audience through its range of headphones and wireless speakers. So they've already been working in this realm since 2010. And so for this reason, I think I asked the question, is this the end for Marshall? I think actually probably it's going to be more or less more like the Mesa Boogie thing, where it seems like it's just business as usual for Mesa Boogie from what I can see. Like they brought out another Mark amp. Has anything really changed since they were purchased? So I think probably will be fine. The Marshall family will still own 24% of the Marshall group. So I'm presuming that hopefully they still get a big say. Terry says, since my father and I created the original Marshall amp back in 1962, we've always looked for ways to deliver the pioneering Marshall sound to music lovers of all backgrounds and music tastes across the world. I'm confident that the Marshall Group will elevate this mission and spur the love for the Marshall brand. Also in this press release it says, celebrating its 60th anniversary last year, Marshall Amplification's iconic black vinyl amplifiers have been championed by some of the world's greatest bands and musicians, from legends including Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, The Who and Oasis, to modern greats Justin Timberlake, famous guitarist, Kendrick Lamar, again a great guitarist, and Lana Del Rey, who again an incredible guitarist who we always see playing through a Marshall, don't we? Have to think fully on the pulse of who guitarists are interested in who play Marshall amps. Anyway, so I think what Marshall have been doing more recently has been quite interesting. I think there's never really been a better time to be a Marshall fan either. So I have honestly never tried a JCM 800 or JCM 900 in the flesh. And I think you can see JCM 900s pop up all around the place these days for sort of less than £500. And a 900 I think is relatively close to an 800. Correct me in the comments if I'm totally wrong. But the fact is that Marshall amps that are 100 watts are not really in fashion anymore. So if you've always wanted to scratch that itch of like, well, what does a cranked Marshall actually sound like? Which I'm quite interested in maybe experimenting with at some stage, maybe when I've got a free house. But yeah, it's probably easier than ever to actually pick up one of the kind of legacy things from the 90s or something like that, like a JCM 900, JCM 2000, and I think even some of those DSLs and that sort of stuff are a little bit underrated, although they're not the flagship kind of JCM 800. I think I've seen Leon Todd videos where he's going through both 800s and 2000s, and it seems that they're pretty close in terms of tone. I think one of the keys to the Marshall sound in general has been that it has to be turned up, because a lot of it is based in the power amps kind of drive. So these days, I think being able to crank a Marshall on a gig or at home, you're probably going to need an attenuator anyway. What has been interesting, I think, from Marshall, so I remember they brought out these 1 watt models, which sound a little bit gimmicky, but I think they were actually quite well regarded, and still I think a lot of people have a soft spot for those. And also then there was the more modern series, the Origin, which were kind of 20 watt and 50 watt. I had a 20 watt, and again, that I thought was a really, really good amp for not a lot of money. And also now they brought out the kind of 20 watt series where you got like the Silver Jubilee, the JCM 800 and the Plexi. And those again were really pretty cool amps, I thought, especially considering this is Marshall, and for me feels like a legacy brand that still has its finger on the pulse somewhat. Although for me I felt like those 20 watt amps were still pretty loud for home use. It's really cool to see them at least trying these things, which are pretty well built amps with most of the specs that you'd want. It seems like of all of the brands, Marshall seems to have still kept a good idea of what people are interested in, and still building like classic reissues as well. So I think probably you'd be fine if you're a Marshall fan. You can find a million of their amps on the used market, especially in the UK. I think for you guys in the US, maybe this might hopefully mean that you can start to get some better pricing on Marshall products, because I think you pay over the odds. Of course, it's a British brand, so that kind of makes sense. It's like one of the very few brands where we kind of get a decent deal compared to you guys over there. But again, let me know your thoughts in the comments if there's a Marshall amp that you think I need to try. I think also if you're going for these sorts of tones like Friedman, Soldano, there's a bunch of them, Cornford, of course, as well, and latterly Beebs let me know about Wangs. So those, I guess, are brands that also do this sort of thing. I think Wangs do a bunch of Marshall clones. As well as plug-in wise, I think Universal Audio have a suite, and also Scuffham, Mike Scuffham, who created Eskia, used to work for Marshall, and I think that's kind of why his Steeler amp sounds pretty good to me. That's what I was using in the intro for most of it, and then at the end I used Helix Native, because of course my favourite guitar player, or one of, Eric Johnson, a Marshall user. I think most of my favourite guitar players have been. So you've got guys like Gary Moore, Eric Johnson, and now I'm of course going to draw a blank. I think Mike Landau, Wayne Krantz. There's so many great Marshall players. Again, if you want to leave some comments about your favourite Marshall players, I guess that would help this video do better potentially. But I think, you know, Mesa Boogie being sold to Gibson didn't seem to really make a huge difference. From what I can see, you can still get Mesa Boogies quite easily on the used market, and they're still bringing out new amps. I think they're gradually getting around to solving the Europe distribution issue. It seems like Marshall have already been working with this company since 2010, so probably, and they've maintained the largest share of the group. I'm guessing it's going to be fine, so don't panic. And anyway, if it was ever going to be a good time to buy a used Marshall. It's been that for a while now because 100-watt Marshalls are simply not in fashion. So I think I might try and pick one up at some point. Let me know if you've got thoughts on what the ideal Marshall to get is. I think Silver Jubilee interests me, but generally anything sort of JCM-ish I think might also be quite interesting, especially if you can use it with a load box. Probably get some cool things out of that. Not the end for Marshall, I don't think, not by a long shot, and probably one of the most legendary amp companies. I think the legacy is going to be strong, and there's so many used amps on the market that it'll be fine, won't it?